the fourth short story of a tale. Tick, tack, where every second counts. And the truth is just a tick away. Martha James had been looking forward to what she guessed would be her last visit to the old cottage formerly owned by her grandparents, both now deceased. It had been their home for over 16 years, and now it belonged to her. Her grandfather died about 11 years ago, and her grandmother 5 years later. It was because of this she was making her final pilgrimage. She had flown home from Australia for her grandfather's funeral, and that was the last time she had visited the pretty rose and wisteria-covered house. She hadn't been around when the decision to deprive her beloved granny of her home was made. Her stepmother wasn't quite so caring. The house had been left empty since the abrupt disruption of the old lady's life, because she was adamant she might want to move back and live in it. She never got the chance. Since her grandmother's death almost 2 years ago, the house had been allowed to rot away. Martha had driven over 150 miles from her house near Bristol to meet the estate agent and finalize the sale of the house by auction. She had so many wonderful memories of long summers staying there. With these in mind, she turned off the main road and headed along a narrow lane, smiling to herself. She left her car on the road to walk the 100 or so yards along the driveway. As she walked, Martha thought back to happier times. She'd spent a lot of time with her grandparents. She particularly adored her grandfather, a lovely, sensitive man, with a love of all things to do with nature. It had been he who had taken the young Martha on walks and taught her the names of the plants and wild flowers. He was always quick to point out the birds who frequented their garden. Her granny was a homemaker. She excelled in what she called good straight cooking. Sunday roasts and apple pies were some of Martha's favorites. Granny was a fantastic seamstress, and almost all of the quilts and curtains had been lovingly made by her. The house had always been bright and cheerful. She'd even made dresses for the little girl. And Martha's favorite, a cloth dolly, with a matching outfit. It no longer looked the way it had been in her granddad's day. He was so meticulous about keeping his garden and grounds in pristine order. The grass was always neat and tidy, with the edges trimmed. People said it could have been used as a croquet lawn, it was so perfect. Her grandfather would have been in despair to see what it had become. Trees, which had always been cut back, now grew together over the drive, making it feel like a dark tunnel, and she hated it. To make it worse, an ugly cloud slid over the sun, causing the foreboding to build up in her mind. She'd arranged to meet the man from the local estate agency. He was coming to take outside photos of the house to display in the catalogue for their next house auction. He'd said there was no point in having internal pictures, as the house was in an awful state. As she walked, Martha thought back to happier times. She'd spent a lot of time with her grandparents. She particularly adored her grandfather, a lovely old man who stooped from spending so much time tending his garden. Martha was dreading entering the house, which had once been her second home, and now was an almost derelict mess. She slowed her steps to delay the moment for unlocking the front door. A bird suddenly flew straight out of the overgrown shrubs lining the unused path. Martha shuddered. Why was she so scared? She mentally asked herself. She knew the answer. She felt someone was watching her from an upstairs window. Someone was willing her forward. The closer she got to the old house, the more frightened she became. Snap out of it, Martha told herself. There was nothing to fear, but she was still afraid. Reaching into her handbag, she found the bunch of old-fashioned keys, one of which would open the front door. A cheerful hello from the young photographer brought her senses back to normal.
I'll just wander round the outside and through the garden and take the pictures I need. As soon as I have done, I'll get back to the office.
Martha heard herself say.
Fine.
She really wanted to beg him to stay and explore the house with her. Sort yourself out, she murmured.
You're a grown woman, have some sense.
She struggled with the heavy key. It didn't seem to want to go into the lock. With difficulty it turned, and the door creaked open. The hall behind it smelt of mildew and dirt. She hadn't been in the house for a long time, and she had never seen it like this before. Martha stopped in the hallway and looked around at the mess. There was the old grandfather clock, her granddad's pride. She remembered sitting on the bottom step of the stairs every Sunday evening, counting the times he turned the key to wind it up for the week. It had made a rasping noise. 1, 2, 3, up to 10. He would then check to see if it was the right time, while she watched the pendulum swing sideways, making a gentle tick-tock noise. Her eyes filled with tears. The old clock face was covered in dirt and grime, making it hard to see through the glass. She called out,
Granddad, I am so sorry. It is my fault it's like this. I was in Australia and too much involved with my job and life. I should have come back to look after the old place. I am so selfish. Nobody answered her. Now she really did begin to cry.
She forced herself to go from room to room downstairs. It was hard to see much, as the windows were almost covered with ivy and the encroaching bushes. A broken window pane had allowed the rain to enter, and much of the old furniture had suffered. There were even signs a bird had fallen down the chimney and died in there. The curtains hung in shreds, and what was left of handmade cushions seemed to have been homes for many mice. The hearthrug her granny had always been so proud of was full of holes. Again she had that eerie sense she wasn't alone. She pulled open the cupboard beside the fireplace, where her grandmother kept her precious china, and was met with a violent crash as shelves collapsed, causing cups, plates, and her grandmother's special teapot to fall onto her feet. Martha leapt back with an anguished cry, followed by sadness in seeing these beautiful things her grandmother had treasured destroyed in a second. She called out again to her grandfather, long deceased.
Granddad, where are you? I need you.
Again she felt the presence of someone beside her. Was it good or evil? She couldn't tell. Was that a movement in the corner of the room? Was someone hiding there ready to leap out at her? Then she smelt it. The pipe tobacco he'd always used. Surely he'd had his chair in that corner. The scent of it was so strong, she knew it was him. Martha forced herself to visit the kitchen. It was just the same.